Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks and welcome for attending this special event. This is our interview, my interview between me, the Tolkien professor, and not just MadeofLions, Jeff Libby from LOTRO, but we also are joined with an extra special guest, which is quite a surprise, a very pleasant surprise for me. With Chris Pearson as well. So we have the entire Tolkien lore brain trust down at Turbine here with us today. So that's great.
It's a little unfair to everyone else,
and
but
no pressure. Also,
no, I'm not saying nobody else contributes, but I know you got the two of you have been on the project the longest, right?
Yeah, I joined it in 1935.
Exactly.
You look very good for your age. I got here in 2005.
2005, yeah, that's great. Well, let me just a brief introduction, especially for people who are new to this interface and haven't joined me in one of these webinar sessions before. In the chat room, if you enter text in the chat room, I'll see that right away. So if you have questions or comments that you would want to make or want me to convey here to my guests, I'd be happy to do that. You won't see the chat. Well, we're not doing a back and forth chat because I'll never keep up with it. But if you want to enter text there, I'll be able to see the questions and convey them. So please go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's talk about LOTRO lore here. I am, as you guys know, I'm, a Tolkien guy. I've been spending years doing my Tolkien podcast and doing close readings of Tolkien and everything. And I just wanted to just start off by saying, and I know I've said it before, I just have so much respect and appreciation for the work that you guys have done. I've said it many times behind your backs, and I'll say it to your face. I think that the adaptation that you guys have done of Tolkien's work in The Lord of the Rings Online is the most thoughtful, respectful, and just kind of thoroughgoing of any adaptation of Tolkien I've seen in any genre. I mean, I think that you guys have really done the best job of anyone in any medium who has attempted to adapt Tolkien. So just thanks so much for the work you guys have done.
That is super nice of you to say,
Yes,
Corey,
yeah.
because we're fans, obviously, of Lord of the Rings.
Well,
I am, I guess I should be specific. I first read Lord of the Rings in 3rd grade. I found my mom's copy of Lord of the Rings in the basement and didn't know what it was, opened it up, and just totally fell in love with it. Like, I brought it to my next door neighbor's house. I sat on top of his swing set and just read part of Fellowship of the Ring for some antisocial reason, I guess. But growing up, pretty much Lord of the Rings was my thing. That was the thing that I was always trying to get people to read and to care about. And I taped the second half of the Rankin Bass Return of the King cartoon off TV, not knowing that there was a Rankin Bass movie of Return of the King. So when I'm flipping channels when I'm a kid and I see this thing, it just blows my mind. And this was in the days before the internet, so I kind of didn't know it was even out there. I brought the Bakshi Lord of the Rings to college on VHS and foisted that on everyone.
Right.
Speaking of adaptations that I love, maybe not as strict in adaptation.
Not quite. Yeah. The one prop I always have to give to the Bakshi version is if you could close your eyes and watch the Bakshi version, it's an incredibly faithful adaptation, right? I mean, that is the script which Peter Beagle did. The screenplay is like a pastiche of quotations. I think there's more straight from the text dialogue in the Bakshi than I can ever remember in any film based on any book. It's amazing how he's kind of put that together. But
my favorite thing about that, though, is in the attempt to make it less confusing, the whole Aruman Sauron thing, like we don't want our villains to have a very similar sounding name. They made it more confusing.
Way more confusing. Yeah. But then of course you add the visual element, and it just becomes surreal, right? Like you hear these lines, like that's a thing that Boromir says, but why is a Viking saying it? I don't understand.
Where are his pants?
That's true too.
Where for God's sake, where are his pants, and why the horned helm?
There was a great website where it has a list of funny things about that movie. I don't remember the website now, but my favorite one that I always remember is when Boromir, I think it's Boromir, jumps out and basically says all this talk of finding and destroying when no one has mentioned anything about.
Yes.
Boromir's got voices in his head though, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I love it anyway.
It probably made sense to him, but yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, good. Well, Chris, what's your sort of Tolkien story? How did you come into Tolkien and kind of get into this whole thing?
I'm a little ashamed to admit that I did not read Lord of the Rings until I was in college. I did read The Hobbit basically in the tub one night when I was 8.
Right.
But after that, I think my first exposure to Lord of the Rings was actually the Rankin Bass Return of the King, which is an odd way to do it. But I put off reading Lord of the Rings for a long time, because I was, it's kind of like how kids today don't listen to classic rock. They listen, I was like, well, this is old people fantasy. I'm reading the new fantasy, and then I read it in college and smote myself on the head for why did I leave that? Why did I not approach that until now? And then I didn't read it again for another 15 years, and since then I've sort of read it out of order about 6 times since between preparing for the game and working on the game. So.
Yeah.
But and all the supplemental stuff fell into place too. There was a Tolkien book, particularly in the early days of developing the game. If there was a Tolkien book, I read it. And down to actually, I read the David Sallow Understanding Sindarin book cover to cover. Except for some of the phonetic shift stuff, because so I've sort of been bathing. I've been soaking in it for a good 10 years. Make that 14 years now.
And maybe it was because I read it at such an impressionable age, but I remember reading The Attack on Weathertop in my bed at night, and it scared me so badly. I kept reading until they got to the ford, and just the whole sequence is still one of the most vivid, this is how I feel when I am scared moments. I remember crying when Gandalf fell in Moria. I didn't believe when he came back in Two Towers. I thought it was a trick of Saruman's.
Right.
Maybe I'm just a gullible kid, but it means a lot, an incredible amount to me. So I love it. Yeah,
that's great. One of the tell us about your experiences, just what it's like when in doing the adaptation. You guys do such a delicate job of reading the text and thinking about the storyline, not just duplicating the storyline. I've always loved the way that both sort of the things that are going on in the world and in the different areas, as well as the quest lines, both kind of go around the story, right? You're kind of doing the stuff on the fringes, while also at the same time, it seems to me, paralleling the story, right? So that you get something very like the experience without just kind of trucking through the main plot line. I know people would like to hear a little bit more just about the. It's a difficult question to ask, and probably a difficult one to answer. But it's the one that everyone, whenever I ask anybody, so what would you want me to ask them? This is always the kind of thing they say first.
Right.
What's that like? What's your thought process like when you sit down to kind of brainstorm? Okay, we're sitting down to do. I was tempted to say something like Bree or the Lone Lands, but I barely remember what I said 2 weeks ago, and I know that the Lone Lands was like 10 years ago for you guys,
Exactly.
so I'm not going to go there. So we'll pick something that I'm familiar with, because it's where actually my character is right in the middle of right now, and is a little bit more recent for you. Let's take the Great River. Okay, the Great River area. So you're sitting down. So it's time to do the Great River. You guys are moving into that area creatively. What's the process? How do you kind of sit down to that, decide what's going to be happening there, what kind of stories you're going to be doing? How does that work?
I'll start this one.
Yeah.
The Great River is a good example of that, actually, because it pulls in a lot of different parts, sort of all the stuff around the Great River area, because this is one of those areas where when Tolkien writes it, it's essentially, they paddled past it and there were some tall reeds and there was nothing there, and he almost specifically says that nothing lived there, and
Yes.
Whenever he does that, we're like, we'll show you lots of stuff lives there.
The reeds were just a little too tall. You couldn't see everybody else.
That was my reasoning. It's like, how could they even see? There's big trees and reeds. So we sort of, the first thing that we do is we define geographically the area that we're trying to stake out. And in this case, it was fairly easy. It was like, take it from Lorien down to, is it the Glanduin?
Well, we hit the Brownlands.
Yeah,
like on the
and along
edge.
along the banks of the Anduin, so what's interesting around there? What are the things that we can draw from? And in the Great River area, the big interesting thing is historical. It's the Battle of Parth Celebrant.
Yes.
And so we felt like we should, given especially that the Easterlings and such get pretty active in that area later on in the story, sort of off camera, we wanted to sort of echo the history of that area and sort of bring the Easterling threat into it. First, start introducing the Rohirrim, because it allowed us to sort of get there was a lot of work to be done to establish a full kingdom full of horse lords, but with by putting an outpost of Rohan in the Great River, it allowed us to, we don't need to make the Rohirrim women yet. We can make it all men there, and come up with a reason why this place is staffed just with guys, and we can make a subset of the buildings to get an idea of how we want it all to work together without having to go, blah, we have to make 8 towns. And in the meantime, we could also bring forward the, at the time we had done Lorien, and then we'd gone off to Dunland for like 2 years or something.
Yeah, this was a really interesting, it says something about game design and also about the importance of being able to think on your feet when you're designing a narrative. Because the natural way of approaching the storyline, almost the first sort of approach is generally, well, which way did the Fellowship go?
Yeah.
Like we'll pretty much follow, fairly behind them, and that way we can experience similar things to what they experienced. But we had a gameplay system approaching in Rohan, the mounted combat system, where we would need a lot of engineering time to create it, which meant that it wasn't going to be ready if we continued straight down from Mirkwood.
Right. Especially if we did it the way the Fellowship did and just hop in a boat and you're there.
And then you have arrived. Though we eventually do kind of do the just get in a boat and you arrive. That's after a lot of other things happen. But it's interesting because we needed to. I think this highlights another interesting thing about designing, about writing stories for the game, in that. It doesn't make much sense with the timeline that we are working on to go into Mirkwood, then to cross the mountains again, run around in Eriador collecting all of the rangers, travel south into Dunland, experience everything that you do in Enidwaith and Dunland, and then bop back across, and gosh, it's only been like a week. But this is one of those things that I think players generally have been willing to sort of accept in LOTRO in general, and I'm glad that they do, because because Tolkien's when Tolkien was writing the Lord of the Rings, he's pretty fastidious about travel times and how long things should take to get there, and and we kind of just ignore it a little bit, and we say that like once we have advanced the storyline
in the normal, but like the PCs seem to have an indefinite time warp to sort of move around it.
It's kind of necessary if we want to actually give people the experience of things. So that we wanted to allow people to see both Theoden and Boromir dying, which is kind of difficult if you can't teleport in the timeline that they. But,
yes.
The coolness of being able to see the Battle of the Fords of Isen is outweighs the they only happened 8 hours apart, so how can you possibly so
yes. Yeah.
But we definitely make use of the pause button. This is one of those things that it does make the it's not the Ballad of Bingo Boffin, but the epic story in a sense is segmented episodic chunks where you get a quest arc and then it pauses for a few months, and then it resumes the second after the previous quest ended. Like no time has passed, even though in the real world it's been however long. But once we came back into the Great River, we had time to work on the mounted combat system, and we had picked up new allies in Dunland, and we had started the kind of laying the groundwork for the tension between Dunlending and Rohirrim, which I think we tend to do a lot with in Volume 3 specifically. Corey, I want to see your farthest character is currently in Great River. Is that correct?
It's right. He is about to enter the Brownlands. I've just gotten to. I've basically just finished Standguard. He just did the Oathbreaker quest chain there in Parth Celebrant, and is at that forward camp up right by the swamp area. That's where he's been in that camp literally for months, actually, because I've been doing other streams all the time. I haven't gotten to play him in forever, but he's been sitting at that camp for about 4 months now. But anyway, yeah. So that's just so I haven't entered the Brownlands yet, and I haven't crossed the final bridge into Rohan. Actually, I'm going to be doing that this next a week from this coming Saturday. I'm doing another Twitch marathon with that character where I'll explore the Brownlands on screen, and I'll get my mounted combat. I've never done mounted combat before, so I'll do that for the first time.
Did you do the Wailing Hills? I believe, was that a region you did?
I don't think I did the Wailing Hills. I don't think I did. I think I might have missed that with this character.
So did you see Landroval? I don't want to spoil too much.
No, I didn't.
All right. Well. All right. Maybe go back and do the Wailing Hills.
I'm going back now. Absolutely. Yeah. That's the giant spider. So one of my listeners is reminding me. Yeah, that's in the like the fellowship area, the fellowship zone of the Great River, right?
I don't believe so.
And I was soloing, and I got chased away by the enormous spiders, I believe.
I didn't think so, but there is a spider-related incident with Landroval. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's one of those situations where it's not really a natural place to encounter eagles, but we wanted some encounter with the eagles.
Yeah. Before we got away from the Misty Mountains.
To sort of provide our big T.
Yeah. Our big T, meaning the stuff that people know from Tolkien, even if they're not totally familiar with the books.
Oh, that's great. No, and needless to say, I always look forward to those so much. No, I'm sad because by my own gaming proclivities, I'm a dedicated completionist. But I've been, because I keep basically all of my listeners and students kept getting on me because I was taking so long to get through the game, because I was doing it, I'm like, okay, I've been playing for a year now and I'm almost to Moria, and everyone was like, come on, would you get to Gondor already? And I'm like, I'm trying. So I sort of I've been forcing myself not to do absolutely everything and kind of truck my main character forward, which is how he's gotten almost to Rohan. I do, however, have a couple alts that I'm kind of coming on behind and doing the completionist thing in the different areas. So I've done completionist, basically all of Eriador. I'm about 3/4 of the way through Enidwaith, and I've done all of Lothlorien and Mirkwood. So I've done and Moria. I've done completionist stuff on all that stuff, like behind the scenes. Which is, of course, another reason why my main character hasn't made more progress than he has. But anyway, okay, it's what I do. So no, I missed that. And no, right, okay, so people are reminding me. Okay, so it's not in the Limelight Gorge. It's outside the Limelight Gorge. But yeah, I missed it. So it must have been
the Limelight River. It's not the Glendoon.
That was. I was confused. Yeah. Corey, I did want to say I had checked into your Grifflet stream temporarily, just in time to see one of our contradictions. So I did want to kind of defend it a little bit.
Okay. Cool.
It's the Book of Mazarbul, which Gimli is supposed to take with him. Right. In our game, he doesn't. In our game, it's located in the chamber. The player gets to pick it up. Which is maybe me being a little bit of a you're glowering at me.
No.
It's maybe me being a little bit of a fanboy, in that I wanted to hold the Book of Mazarbul. But the real reason for it is that when you bring it to the Iron Garrison, that it is used as the catalyst for the We Cannot Get Out session play, which is the account of basically the fall of the expedition, and I wanted those dwarves to have the detailed account of what happened there, so that you can then talk to one of them to begin the flashback session play.
Absolutely,
Otherwise, while it still probably could have worked, like it could be like, oh, look at all of this, the wreckage and the remains and the corpses. We can kind of piece together what happened. I thought it would be a good choice to have the on-hand information. That said, I'm sure Gimli got it eventually, and it'll end up in its proper place.
Right.
But that is one of the cases where sometimes we do. There's another one later on in Volume 3, but I don't want to spoil it until you get there. It's the arrival of a group of people.
Yes.
Happens earlier than it really would. But
right.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. No, that's great. And because you're right. I mean, I've talked about that in my stream before, and the reason I talked about that is that it's one of the very few. I mean, if I had to make a list of like stuff they changed, like stuff that was legitimately contradicting something that was actually in the book, it's a really, really, really short list, and it's one of the very few.
And we're proud of that. We're proud of that, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to happen sometimes with adaptation, regardless. But we have tried to sort of keep it down to a minimum while still acknowledging that it's a game. A lot of our decisions are where we go against the grain of the books in some way or another are because we're making a game, and there are certain things that work better for a game than they do for a book, like putting all sorts of people in Parth Caliban, for instance.
Right. Exactly. No, I mean, and that's part. It's the adaptation thing, right? There's no difference between that and saying, well, because it's a film instead of a book, we have to do some. There's some ways that you have to change the story in order to adapt to the visual medium in a film and the time frame that you've got for storytelling and all that stuff. So that's just being an adaptation. But no, I as I say, I've never seen anything. Any adaptation that tries harder to be faithful and to avoid those kinds of changes. Actually, someone on Twitter was asking about this. Actually, that is, those times when you feel you are, as you're like with your story, right? Especially as you go through like the volume stories and everything, and as the story your own story begins to build momentum. There have to be those moments where you want to go in this direction, but then you're kind of running up against things that Tolkien said, and how do you kind of manage? Can you think of some good examples of times where you've had to really balance that carefully?
Well, I think one recently with Gondor, and it's not really all that spoilery, but we really wanted you to be able to interact with Faramir at some point, and he's like, we approached Gondor sort of going the Aragorn track, so we could again build up to Minas Tirith and not just bam Minas Tirith right away, and never actually see the other parts of Gondor. But as a result, because we followed the Aragorn track, by the time you can reasonably get to where Faramir is, he is, Osgiliath is not doing well, and he's in the battle for the battle on the Pelennor is about, or the siege of Gondor is about to begin. Right. And we just, we never really got to have a good Faramir. Good chat with Faramir.
Yeah, you see him at a very low point, and then it only gets worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I'm hoping we can have some fun with Faramir later on.
Yeah, I think that's probably a safe bet.
So there's certain things that I kind of wish we could have done, but it's just we because of the fact that we couldn't see Faramir, we sort of use that as a hook to build some of the story around it, where you're actually trying to find him and gradually finding out that things are not going so well and he's not really available right now.
Yeah, the arrival of the Dawnless Day in particular sort of locked us into because once that arrives, we're talking days.
It's on.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
Which is a difference from Eriador, because in Eriador we had it locked at probably the best time to have it locked.
Yeah. When everyone's in Rivendell.
Yep. So that then it's
the month before Christmas, right?
It's sort of it's a very convenient place to have it, because you can have so many adventures going on in Eriador and in Angmar, and you don't sort of need to worry about it once they start moving. Especially since we need to enter Moria after them. Yes. It kind of that sort of sets the tone for the course of the game in a way, as far as timeline always advancing.
Yeah. No, I see. Now, there's of course one of the tools that you guys have used in times past to be able to sort of vary it like that is with the session play. Right, which I get so excited when I get to a session play moment. They're like my favorite things, and Jeff, I completely agree with you. The liberty taken with the Book of Nazarbal is roundly justified by the we cannot get out session play. Like that is more than enough. To
be fair, we probably would have done it anyway. We would have just phrased it differently. But yeah, that was always a session that I had wanted to do that from the very beginning, pretty much. If there was any way to have us experience that moment like that, we were gonna do that.
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you now. I've got something I have to take care of. But Jeff will be here for the
Chris got me rolling. I'm rolling downhill now.
Exactly,
I'm all set.
Yeah. All right. So thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Now my ability to pronounce things is gonna vanish. Chris is the master at how to pronounce everything. I learned it all from books. So.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I still struggle with that sometimes too. Actually, my own. There are still some Tolkien names or words that I still mispronounce because I just can't. Like, I know how they're supposed to be, but I just can't do them differently than I have done them for years.
I got used to saying Gleowine. Apparently it's Gleowina.
Gleowina. Yeah, the W-I-N-E ending is hard. That was because I was that's a great example actually. For years, of course, I pronounced them all wine, and so trying to shift to Elfwina and all that stuff. Yeah, it's but it is supposed to be 2 syllables. So yeah.
Chris keeps us honest on the pronunciation as much as possible.
Yeah. That's great. Well, back to the Moria stuff. I want to thinking about that storyline a little bit more. The way that it's let me tell you first sort of the way that it struck me, and then you can tell me not about like whether I'm right or wrong, but just about your own thoughts about it. Sure. Because one of the questions that I got on Twitch when I was asking about that was, what was the thought? Someone wanted to know the thought process behind making Moria a reconquest story versus a dungeon crawl. Just kind of exploring and going through. And my own sort of thoughts about, I have loved the way that story unfolds. I've been really interested in the Moria story, and it seems to me it's actually something that I would point to as essentially a almost like a case study in how LOTRO story adaptation works for me. I mean, like it's one of the things I would point to as an illustration for the way the LOTRO story works. I'll tell you what I mean and what sort of the things that I see there. On the one hand, we're getting something which is almost like a retelling of a story that Tolkien tells, namely Balin's attempt to resettle Moria, right? There's an obvious parallel there, right? The dwarves from the Lonely Mountain come out and they're like, it's time to reconquer Moria. Except, of course, it's not exactly the same because they have the example of Balin's company. And even before they get into Moria, they're feeling pretty confident that he failed and that they all died, right? So they have this sort of cautionary tale in front of them the whole time. But nevertheless, so it's not just a rehash, right? It's not just a redoing the same thing, but it is parallel. And being able to, the way that the reconquest story enables us to see the kind of explicitly dwarvish story frame that it gives to our own exploration of Moria seems to me very, very fitting, right? As we, so that it's not just like us as random hobbits, elves, and humans and whatever exploring through Moria, but that we're explicitly seeing it in the context of the dwarves returning to Khazad-dûm, and that's really, and then and the way that it explicitly parallels them with the overconfidence and with the discovery of the Book of Mizarble being this sort of pivot point right in the middle of that story, where you have what's his name? Which of the Broger? Yeah, Broger is like the annoying jerk dwarf who is first overconfident and then depressive. But yeah,
I can't really disagree with that assessment. I mean, that was how he's written. It's very true that the Moria story it's doing something that we also did in Volume 1. I think maybe we did it a little more obviously in Volume 2, in that this is very clearly a sort of, it has a parallel to Balin's expedition. But in Volume 1, one of our primary antagonists / protagonists / it's complicated has a very similar to Gollum Smeagol thing going on. You early on in Volume 1, you encounter you gather a council of various races that meet to decide on something.
Right.
We very much are trying to provide similar, like evocative story points that are evocative of Lord of the Rings without being a straight up duplication or meaning the same thing. And in Moria, the Moria story at launch of the expansion pack, it was books 1 through 6 of Volume 2. So
that's coming through the first Azog story when Bosi gets captured, not Bosi, when Bori gets captured.
It covers up through, I believe he gets captured in book 5? 5 is when all of the battles take place with the orcs and everything, the drums in the deep. And then 6 is we head out to Lothlorien and we start incorporating elves into the narrative. And then that's sort of when the overall story of Volume 2 becomes more of a dwarf elf kind of, are we going to be able to get along to solve this problem? And the answer is kinda. But ultimately, the fate of Ziggelberg, I think, is maybe the key to the Moria story, in that it's first seen as like, oh, this is gonna give us the thing we need to win. Like, this is a sign that Moria can be reclaimed, and then it ultimately they sort of. They do maybe not the same choice as the One Ring, but they do a very undwarf-like thing. Right. I think. Absolutely. This is us going where we feel the story should go, and that I think it says a lot about what the Iron Garrison has experienced, that they are mostly willing to go along with it.
Right. Yeah,
Which
and
I think is interesting.
I love the like that reunion moment in that instance when you go through and meet all of the dwarves that you've helped
yeah.
at various points throughout Moria.
My favorite, I forget his name, but the legendary item guy is my favorite.
Yes, that's right. When he asks, "So, do you still have?" Oh, wait, you got rid of it? Oh, okay, yeah. That was really funny. But yeah, that was that was an especially rewarding instance to do at the end of my completionist Moria stint. It's like I know every one of them. But yeah, no, that was really good, and I love the way in which that, in a sense, Ziggelberg ends up becoming. You mentioned it being like the destruction of the ring. Ziggelberg ends up being a kind of stand-in for a dwarf ring, right? The dwarf rings aren't available, so we can't actually have any dwarf rings. But instead, we get this item which is very, very dwarfish, right? In the Mithril Axe. I mean, even just that phrase itself, right? Mithril Axe, like that's.
And
you
the
can't
thing
get
I've
dwarfish than that, right?
I've gotten a little grief over the years from people who say, how effective would a mithril axe really be? And I'm like, well, it can cut anything and it's really light, so it's probably great. If you were a dwarf, you would love it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I love how the dwarves all just like fanboy over the idea at the beginning, except for Broger, of course, who's busy being a jerk. But
I do have an interesting tidbit actually about Bosie and Broger. They were originally in my original spec for Volume 2. They were originally going to be Biffer and Bofer.
Okay.
But because our first instinct is, well, we want to incorporate characters that people will have an attachment to and recognize. And it was changed sort of because the Hobbit movies were in pre-production, and there was some concern that maybe we don't want to like confuse people if our version is different than the version in the movies. So I think I'm happier with these being new dwarves.
Right. And they're the sons of Biffer and Bofer, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I believe that was what we settled on as kind of an Easter egg, pretty much to us. That well, they're still part of the family line. Like,
yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time in my marathon journey through Moria just a couple of weeks ago trying to figure that out. It's like, okay, wait, so whose sons are? They're calling each other cousins. Does that mean that we were going through like, okay, because it's always hard to because of the three of Biffer, Buffer, and Bomber in The Hobbit, right? Two of them are brothers, and the other one is the cousin of the two brothers. Right, and so I'm pretty sure it's Buffer and Bomber who are brothers, and Biffer who's their cousin, I think. Right, but then one of Bosie and Broger refer to each other as cousins, and so we're like, wait a second, are they first cousins or second cousins? And then finally it got revealed, at least for one of them, when we were with Bori. Doing his crazy, we're gonna sneak down into the Redhorn Lodes and
what could have gone wrong?
Exactly, with like the two other dwarves running the distraction campaign up top, and anyway, so he declares himself then, right? I am Bori, son of Bosi, son of Biffer, wasn't it?
I think so. He's the one that would have been Biffer, yeah.
Yeah. And so we were sort of cheering at that moment, like, hey, okay, we were pretty much right about that. Yeah. As Karita, one of my listeners, says, she says, I think it's speaking to the nerdiness levels that we are this excited about dwarf family trees. Yes, it's true. Yeah, cool. So yeah, anyway, as I say, I'm to me the thing that kind of thinking about the LOTRO project as an adaptation project, the wonderful opportunity that it provides, not only in its scope. I mean, you think about how when you're adapting a book to a film, right, how there's always this massive compression, no matter how long the film is, even with like 9 hours of Lord of the Rings films, massive compression always going on. With the gaming experience, it's like, no, we have like a couple hundred hours we can basically do, so it's a totally different kind of relationship. but of course, the great opportunity that comes along with that is the way in which, as an adaptation project, it enables both you guys as designers and the players to really just kind of invest imaginatively in a particular area. Again, Moria is such a perfect example, right? Where we get the concept of Moria, and we spend a couple chapters in Moria, and there are lots of different kind of references to, we get lots of kind of outside the main storyline allusions to Moria, whether it be, the speech that Gimli makes about the three mountains, right, when he sees them in the distance from Eregion, or whether it be the conversation with Galadriel and Celeborn on the other side, right, when they're thinking back on it and everything. So we get some other context and everything, but but really the Moria experience in the books is over fairly quickly. And the opportunity to kind of go in and really begin to sort of put down imaginative roots, right, in Moria is such a cool experience as a reader of the books and as a player of the game, and that's why I really loved that particular choice for the epic quest line, because again it gives, as I said, like, it puts everything in a dwarfish context, right? It contextualizes.
It's the feel like a dwarf part of the epic story. It's like you get to, even if you're not playing a dwarf character necessarily, you're experiencing what it's like to be a dwarf.
Yeah.
Thinking back, it's funny too, talking about how comparatively brief a time we spend in some of these locations, like the Lone Lands. We spend time at Weathertop. But we sort of don't, in the book, you get a few mentions, like the Forsaken Inn being a day's journey east of Bree is like, you get that, you get Weathertop, and then you are almost in the Trollshaws. Like I remember back when before there was an epic story, because there was a time before there was an epic story, MMOs, at the time, it wasn't a given that you were going to have a one main storyline through everything. Like World of Warcraft had a sort of like the Defias Brotherhood, I guess, is sort of a storyline that goes through. FF11 had missions that sort of took you through, but it wasn't a given that we were going to do a sort of a quest chain that is going to cover many regions and many levels and start at the beginning and go straight through. So I remember we had a meeting early on where we all got in a room and we were trying to decide if we're going to tell a story, for example, in the Lone Lands, what would it be? And our first idea was, well, we'll find out what is the story of the Lone Lands. Like, what is the seed of what we could tell a story around? Right. And that's why book 2 ends up being pretty much the introduction of the Red Maid in volume 1.
Yes.
Where you are in wilderness. Weathertop plays a large role because Weathertop played a large role in Lord of the Rings. From its height, what could you see? And so we told a self-contained story there. And then in the launched product of LOTRO, we pretty much tried to tell self-contained stories in the regions. When I went to make the book 4 story in the Trollshaws, which involves basically learning about a wood troll threat in the Trollshaws and allying with Legolas, it ended up getting rather larger than I learned a lesson. I want to remember. Remind me to tell you a lesson I learned from book 4. But first, the book 4 got pretty much too big because there were loose ends at the end of it. Where did the Nazgul go? The Nazgul that you are chasing through book 4, which is I think the popular conception of the epic story in LOTRO is that we are filling in the gaps. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true because there aren't actually a lot of gaps. Like I've always thought what we're doing is we're extrapolating and extending on what we do know. Right. And so the fact that they only found 8 horses at the Fort of Bruinen is like, well, I'm doing something with that. Like, what happened to the
9th horse? Absolutely.
So that's kind of where that in book 4 that thread comes from. And with the Nazgul getting away at the end of book 4, it then turns into, well, in book 5 we got to find out where the Nazgul went. And so I think you can, even from outside the walls, I think you can see that we're already before the launch of the game, kind of struggling to keep our stories confined to single regions, because the Angmar story of book 6 and then 7 and then 8, like it's definitely taking more to tell. And then the second half, pretty much the live epic story updates of Volume 1, which are book 9 through 15, like that's one story pretty much.
Yes, absolutely.
The lesson I learned from book 4 was, and this I think is a thing that works well in narrative, like reading a book, where the heroes go to find something. They didn't find it. Right. In a game, players going into troll caves looking for something don't like to get to the end of 3 troll caves and discover nothing. That, like, good job, you didn't find it. In retrospect, that may not have been, like, that's the kind of thing I probably wouldn't do as much these days. Of course, there's probably evidence out there of me doing it recently, but I hope not. But
right. Yeah,
but that's kind of an interesting, like, sometimes you can get away with things in just fiction that you kind of can't in a computer game.
Right. Yeah. No, I can see that. And yeah, and by the way, on the Nazgul theme, I think Where Now the Horse and the Rider is my favorite quest title of the entire epic quest chain. I'm super proud of it. I'm also a little guilty because it's totally not, like, if you look at it, it totally doesn't belong there. But it also kind of does. Like, I just love the verbal play of it, right? I mean, of course, it has nothing to do with Rohan, right? But the idea of taking what delighted me about it so much is how far out of context that line is taken, and yet it's perfectly apt and really fun.
That might be considered the littlest T. Like, where we have big T, then there's also like the littlest T. One thing, a lot of times we'll put in references to chapter titles or lines from the book or whatever as quest. Like, for example, there's a quest in Epic Book 13 when Narquil is coming south again, and there's a quest title which is Narquil Goes South. Narquil Goes, which is basically the ring goes south, but right. You know, it made us laugh. So maybe there's some value. No,
I always love those, and even more maybe I don't know how many different sizes of T's you have, but those I know because I've talked with Chris Pearson about this in the past, and I know even though you guys have it's okay for you guys to allude to things that are in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I know that you're kind of careful about using too much direct text and quotation. So even when you're I was just talking about this in my stream last week when I was doing the Fellowship Departs from Rivendell instance. And so of course, like, there's dialogue there that they actually so I was kind of commentating as Gimli and Elrond are going back and forth, right? And it's a really interesting kind of balance that you're doing, like having them talk about the same things but without using the same words, but not wanting to depart from it too much.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance, because the problem is that the words as written are the best. Like, we're not gonna do better than that. Right. But we do try to become good at paraphrasing in such a way that we're still getting the meaning. We're not just scrambling the words up just to, like, satisfy the requirement of, like, well, we don't want to put the text in the game because for reasons. But, like,
is separate, and exactly right.
But like, we still want to get it across in a believable, like, manner that conveys the meaning of what it is, which I think we've gotten pretty good at it over the course of developing the game. There are some times where we will straight up be able to use, like, a short sentence or something, but it gets tough for long dialogue sequences. Not to spoil anything, because we are pretty much we're in Gondor now, so the update 19 is going to cover the last debate. Nice. Which is a very interesting thing to paraphrase. Yes. I think we did a pretty good job at getting the meaning across, but it's sort of the ultimate like demonstration of, we're telling you what happened using slightly different words, but I think it conveys it still pretty well.
Yeah.
So
that's great. But my favorite Easter eggy things, again, like that tiny little T, is when I come across lines which are almost straight from the book or just adapted slightly from the book in a completely different context from a completely different speaker. I love that. I mean, I can see those moments when when you kind of when you just sort of use a phrase which is like a Boromir phrase or an Aragorn phrase, and it's again different character, different region, totally different, but kind of just using the language. I love that.
Speaking of the littlest T, it's just, a lot of times we put things in that I don't think are distracting for people that don't know the book, but for people who do, like I like to think of them as like, oh, you're paying attention. Like, oh, what's one? I'm trying to think of like a Moria one. Oh, Rumel and Orphan, not knowing the yeah, like that's a thing that if you talk to them for that quest and you are anything but an elf, they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about. If you talk to them as an elf, whichever one you talk to, I forget if it's Rumel or Orphan, but he says like, oh, hey, what's up? This is what's going on. So it's just little things that are in there, I think, which are just for shading, for fleshing out the experience a little bit for people who have read the books and are super into them.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. No, and I've always, as I said with the Book of Mizarbo, very rarely have I, not only have I rarely found things that are actually contradictions, but almost always, I mean, I know I'm not the only one who does this, but my fellow hardcore Tolkien geeks and I, whenever we go into a new area, they're usually like things that we run to see, like, is it there? Is it going to be there? Right? So I mean, like a very small example for me, the very first time I went to the House of Tom Bombadil, the first thing I did was run around the back to see if there were beans on poles. Which there are beans on poles, right? It just like all of the the things that are, and of course the basins with the water lilies in them and everything. It's just great. Though several people are wanting me to talk about the one small critique that we were going through is actually, this came up when we were doing the Bingo Boffin quests. I started late. We were just getting we're getting towards Moria, and we're actually exactly where we are is I'm forgetting his name, the dwarf with the eye patch. Who's
Spalvey?
Spalvey. He's we're in the quest where he's trying to find a new name. That's as far as we've gotten.
Oh, all right.
And but we're kind of laughing about the fact that like he's trying to find himself here at this time when we're supposed to be rushing down to Moria to like rescue Bingo, who's been bobbing down the river the whole time. But anyway.
Well, not only that, he's sending you to go do things to get him to learn to find out his new name, which is kind of the ultimate MMO sort of gameplay, isn't it? It's like, hi there, I'm a quest giver. Like, I want to find out who am I? What is my purpose in life? Like, go defeat some monsters and come back and tell me. And then when you find, well, I don't know if you finished that quest yet. I don't want to spoil anything, but when you finally do, he comes back and chooses a different name entirely. So
different name, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't surprise me at all. But anyway, so when we were doing the Bingo quest chain, I was doing as we were doing it, I was reading the quest text aloud as I was going through, which I often do.
Cool.
And that Tom Bombadil's dialogue. It's
very tricky.
It's tricky. It doesn't quite capture his meter. We're sort of that's
definitely true. The difficult thing with that is that since Bingo was such an unusual sort of quest, I wasn't entirely sure that I was going to be able to finish it when I started it. So a lot of the early parts in particular were me going very rapidly. So with Tom Bombadil, like it was kind of a like stretch goal. So with Tom, I was kind of like, it's close. Like it's pretty. He's odd. Maybe he's having an off day. It really is. What? Another thing that I feel like I did a pretty good job of with Mordrembor, but there were some people who made quests involving Black Numenorians. The these and the thys and the thous are not entirely consistent across.
Yes. I was joking about that in my Grifflet. In fact, I record my Grifflet streams. We put them on our YouTube channel, and one of the titles, one of my staff people who's in our kin, in the game who makes up the titles for all of my Grifflet streams. Actually sort of picked up on the joke I was making about that, and so there's one of the Grifflet episodes that's called "In Which Mordrembor Conjugates Poorly." But yeah, so,
that might happen from time to time.
Hey, this is Cordovan here. I just wanted to thank you again for having us on. We're kind of running out of time here, so I don't know if you have any kind of final questions or that you wanted to do.
Great. Oh, well, I don't know where to end.
Maybe a lightning round.
Yeah, we could talk for a long time. I know, and of course, it probably makes sense to have somebody here to bring us to an end, or we might talk for hours and hours.
I would keep going. So
yeah, well, I think what I'd love to do, maybe when I get to the end of Volume 3, maybe I'd like to do it again so we can have a Volume 3 talk in particular. And there's
I can apologize for my chronology thing at the end, though I would defend it. Sneak preview, I would defend it.
Okay, all right, that'll be interesting. And I would end with the offer. Some of us in the Mythgard Kin we're talking about this, because in the Mythgard Kin we're not only pretty hardcore Tolkien geeks, but like literature geeks as well. We're offering if we'd be happy to help to recast some of Tom Bombadil's lines in trochaic hexameter if you if you would like.
I would certainly take it under advisement.
Yeah. Just offer it. Just say it. It's out there. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. This has been it's been a wonderful time
really
to
fun.
talk about it. Yeah, I'd love to talk more. Look forward to future opportunities to talk more, especially as I hopefully begin to get caught up. I'm hoping to make it to Mount Doom at about the same time you guys do. So we'll that's my target. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It was super fun. I could talk about LOTRO for forever.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks. And thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to get a chance to do this again. So thanks everybody, and have a good day. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.